Hey, this is Idea Coaches for Coach East Rome. Weighing in on the weight classes, episode 9B, the review of UFC 138, Mark Munoz versus Chris Leben. Okay, let me start with the preliminary card. The fight I really want to talk about is the fight I'm very happy about is Omigawa finally winning the UFC. He beat Jason Young. And to be honest with you, I was very worried that first round. That first round, I thought Omigawa was just going to get outstruck, and I was actually fearful that he would lose it late in the second, the way he was getting tagged in the first. He came back in the second round, worked some groundwork, and pretty much dominant the remainder of the fight up until the last couple of minutes of the third round. Very happy about that. Also, let's get into the fight that I predicted but I got wrong, was the Anthony Perez versus Cyril Diabate, and actually it was actually playing out the way I thought it was. I thought it was going to, up until the point where Perez put Cyril Diabate against the fence and then tapped out the snake. And one thing I've noticed with Diabate is that I love his combinations. He's very fluid, he's very slick, even though he has a kind of snake jab, hence the name the snake. But he doesn't really seem to have knockout power. I think he'll be, well, he's 37, 39 years old at this point, but I think, he didn't really have that much success in K1. He actually technically had more success in MMA, but his style is more K1. I was surprised that Anthony pulled off the victory. I mean, the first round, though it was extremely boring, was going exactly the way I thought that the fight should have went. The snake just keeping him at bay with the striking. Perez couldn't get any takedowns going on, and then in the second frame, kind of like ran up against him and took him down, and it was all academic from that point. Another fight that I want to talk about, and this is something I looked up online, was that Thiago Alvarez got caught once again being overweight. And then earlier today I saw on SureDog that one of the doctors was saying that they had 4 different scales that all weighed Thiago at different weights, which I don't understand, because were they weighing all fighters on different scales? I mean, if all fighters got weighed on one scale and you had 3 other reserve scales, were everyone else getting weighed differently for some odd reason? There's no real point to bringing that thing up, because if his opponent weighed on point on that scale and he didn't, then he's overweight. Unless you're using, for some ridiculous reason, using different scales for different fighters. And in some ways that would be unfair. So the article wasn't very clear about that. I think it was a bullshit excuse. Alvarez is not tall enough for 185. I think he'd get murdered up there, but he just can't seem to have enough discipline to stay at 170. So I don't know what's going on with that guy. He tapped out some dude I've never seen fight before. I didn't preview that fight because I had no idea who that guy was, and his name slips my mind at the moment. From a guy who not too long ago at UFC 100 fought GSP for the title, his competition has really taken a fall. I know he lost to Rick Story, but still, I mean, this is getting kind of like on the new fighter level of competition. And speaking of which, that leads me to my next fight of Terry Edom versus Edward Forloloto. And Forloloto tapped the guy, Terry Edom tapped Forloloto in 17 seconds. And that's amazing. I mean, to tap someone in 17 seconds is ridiculous. I mean, even if there's a straight BJJ match, much less MMA, where there's striking involved and you have to think about what kind of punches they're going to throw at you, or strikes or defenses that are outside of the regular world of grappling. That's amazing. However, like I said before in the preview, where does this put Terry Edom from here? He's a veteran now. You have to consider him a veteran at the lightweight division. So, I mean, yeah, he tapped Loloto, who is now 0-3 under Zuffa. And the only fight I ever saw him before this Terry Edom fight was the fight he had at WEC 52. And just because he was fighting another person with a very peculiar name. So that's the reason I watched his fight. I did not see his UFC debut that happened on a UFC Live. I didn't watch. To be honest with you, I think the UFC kind of screwed for Loloto. I mean, really, if you're 0-2, you shouldn't be going up against a vet. I kind of blame Loloto's management and the UFC for kind of like accepting that fight. I think he should have fought a newer fighter, someone like John McGuire, who looked pretty good in his UFC debut. A friend of mine is from Britain, so he knew about this guy, and he told me a lot of good things. And you know, look, John McGuire looked pretty nice out there tonight. Let's get to the main event. The way it turned out was pretty much how I saw it in my head. I just thought Chris Lieben was going to last until about the 4th round. Mark Munoz finally used that wrestling ground and pound this guy out. Lieben, I'm talking about. You know, cut him up pretty bad, and then, you know, in between rounds 2 and 3, Lieben couldn't see, and the doctors had to award Mark Munoz the TKO victory. I don't know what was going on with Chris Lieben, because the last real fight I saw of him was the Akiyama fight. I did not see the Wanderlei Silva fight at all. I know what happened. He beat him in like in 30 seconds or something. I saw the Brian Stann fight, the fight in which he got knocked out, but he was sick and he looked, you know, lethargic and slow and sloppy. So I kind of like bypassed that performance because it was known that he was sick. But for some reason, maybe it's just me, but you know, Lieben, like his upper body looked big. I mean, he looked really, really slow. Like, I mean, like I think like he was actually doing a lot of like just pure weight training. I mean, it seems like from a guy who personally who has lifted weights before and done boxing, is like when you combine the two, it slows you down dramatically. And it just seems to me that he did something like that in his training, because he looked really unathletic out there tonight. It was just very uncharacteristic of him. I mean, I know he's no GSP, but at the same time, Chris Lieben is a better fighter than what he showed today. You know, now you have Mark Munoz and he wants a title shot. You can't blame the guy. I mean, he's only lost one fight at middleweight to Okami. But still, I think that he should fight either the winner of Mayhem Bigsby or the loser, and I don't know if they're going to have this fight, of Vitor versus Anthony Rumble Johnson. Someone like that before he actually becomes a legitimate threat to the UFC middleweight title. That being said, if there's any sort of injuries or something happens to one of the fighters in their personal lives, Mark Munoz will now make a fantastic substitute and a step-in replacement for anyone up in the upper echelon of the middleweight division as a substitute opponent for Anderson Silva. So that's pretty good. Now I want to get into the main issue of this card. And there was a lot of people saying like, oh, this card sucks. And other people are arguing, well, you know, this card is for free, so why are you complaining? Stop your bitching. This is what it comes down to, is that the UFC is a brand. It's the most recognized mixed martial arts organization in the world today. A card like this, given for free, or maybe even pay-per-view, would be okay for something like a Vin Elite XC or a Pro Elite Fighting, you know, one of those kind of organizations. The fact of the matter is that the UFC, you know, it always talks about, well, it's the #1 organization. So we as fans of MMA, and more than likely fans of UFC, because we both form that Venn diagram, expect more from the UFC. And I really think that they kind of came up a little short here. I mean, there was a lot of great finishes. I mean, like the 17-second submission. Crazy. But at the same time, who is it against? You know, I mean, now that you have Terry Edom, he won, he won this fight, but I mean, who does he face next? What, a Jim Miller or maybe a Jeremy Stevens? But really, with those guys and their competition which they face, and Terry Edom's competition which he faced, I can't put this guy in the second tier lightweight division contendership, much less someone who wants to at some point fight for the title. And that's the problem with either the UFC's promotional tactics of their fighters or their UFC's branding, because everything becomes goal-oriented towards the title. I mean, yeah, there's people who are anomalies like a Kimbo Slice, or veterans who were champions for a while and they can't compete for the belt anymore. Guys like Randy Couture or, Matt Hughes, fighters of that nature. But to be honest with you, Terry Edom doesn't fall in either one of those categories. So if you're not ultimately going for a title of some kind in your division, you're either going to get cut or you're going to have to change divisions. And that doesn't work out for everybody. It works out for some fighters, but it doesn't work for everyone. I mean, look at Kenny Florian. So it's kind of like, how do we look at this? Do we look at this as at a fan standpoint that we want to see exciting fights with exciting finishes because UFC 138 did deliver there? Or do we want to put this in the continuity of the other UFC events that have been taking place, present and past, and say, well, everyone has to lead up to go into some sort of higher division of competition, or fighting for the #1 contendership? And that's where it did not succeed. So I think when they're coming out with all these different events, this is how the MMA fatigue actually starts to hurt over in the long run, because I don't think the UFC can keep pulling off these kind of cards like this. And I want to take time now before I go into episode 10A, where I'm going to be talking about Fox 1. It's just, the Fox agreed to have only the championship fight air. And at first that confused the hell out of me. But when I thought about it, well, this isn't pro wrestling, and maybe they can't fill up the times correctly and succinct them to, their half an hour, hour-long brackets, because you have to include commercials and things of that nature. So maybe it doesn't, it's a little bit different, but at the same time, we have to think about what we want as fans before we give out any commentary about free cards, because you have to think of it like in two ways. Is this going to be like, like a UFC 136 where there's titles on the line, or is it just like, hey, let's knock out some people you've never seen before, more than likely? I don't know. It's something for all of us to think about before we talk about how good or how bad, free UFC cards are. So that's my weighing in of UFC 138. And please check me out tomorrow night for UFC Win on the Weight Classes episode 10A. All right, guys, take care.